The sky wasn't falling. It was just gone. 1 second, Captain Sarah Jenkins was flying a $60 million fighter jet through the pitch-black stratosphere. The next, a brilliant, blinding green light sliced through the canopy, and every screen in her cockpit died. Welcome to the dark. The cockpit of an FA-18F. Super Hornet smells exactly like you'd expect. Stale sweat, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of recycled oxygen. It doesn't smell like glory. It smells like a cubicle where the thermostat is permanently broken and your chair actively tries to crush your spine. Captain Sarah Jenkins adjusted her oxygen mask, wincing as the rubber dug into the red crease it had been grinding into her nose for the past 4 hours. She shifted her weight. The survival gear packed into the seat pan felt like a sack of doorknobs. "Fuel state?" she asked, her voice flat, distorted by the comms link. "We're at point 4, came the voice from the back seat. Lieutenant David Miller, her weapons systems officer, a guy who treated a combat patrol over a contested international strait with the same weary resignation as a man stuck in morning traffic. "Enough to loiter for another 20. Then we have to hit the tanker or swim home." Let's hope the tanker's still awake. Outside the reinforced glass canopy, there was nothing. No stars. No moon. Just a thick, unbroken marine layer of clouds below them, and the suffocating void of the night sky above. They were 32,000 feet over a stretch of ocean that 3 different nations claimed as their own. Politics meant nothing up here. Up here, there was only fuel, altitude, and the green glow of the multifunction displays illuminating Sarah's visor. The radar swept a digital cone of invisible energy out into the darkness, painting a picture of an empty sky. "Overlord, this is Ghost 2-1, Sarah said, keying the radio. "Station holding. Picture clear." "Copy 2-1, the AWACS controller replied. His voice was smooth, bored, a guy sitting at a console 300 miles away, drinking decent coffee. "Maintain current orbit. Be advised, we have intermittent surface contacts in grid Delta 9er, suspected fishing fleet." "Copy that." Sarah let her hand relax on the stick. The jet practically flew itself right now. The fly-by-wire system interpreted her slight muscle twitches into smooth, computer-aided corrections. It was a marvel of engineering that she trusted about as far as she could throw it. She was a cynic. You didn't survive 2 tours in a sandbox and a dozen close calls over open water without expecting the machinery to betray you at the worst possible moment. You ever think about the fact that we're sitting on top of 2 enormous bombs full of highly combustible liquid? Miller mused from the back. "Every time I hit turbulence, Dave. Just checking. Makes me feel alive." She smiled grimly behind the mask. The banter was necessary. It kept the mind from drifting into the void. It kept you sharp. Down below, a break in the cloud cover revealed a sliver of the ocean. It was black, churning ink. Then, the ink lit up. It wasn't a flash. It wasn't a strobe. It was a solid, impossibly thick pillar of emerald light that shot straight up from the surface of the water. It hit the jet's underbelly, refracted off the moisture in the air, and pierced the canopy. The light didn't just illuminate the cockpit. It eradicated every shadow, bleaching the entire world into a searing, agonizing neon green. Sarah screamed. She didn't mean to, but the pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like someone had driven a pair of white-hot needles directly through her corneas. She slammed her eyes shut, but the green light was so intense it burned right through her eyelids, painting the inside of her skull. "Christ!" Miller yelled from the back. A loud clatter echoed through the intercom as he flailed, hitting his helmet against the canopy rail. Laser. The word ripped through the panic in Sarah's mind. A military-grade dazzler. Surface to air. She'd read the briefs. She knew the rogue factions operating in these waters had been purchasing black market optics. but reading about it in a brightly lit briefing room was a universe away from having your retinas scorched out at Mach 0.8. Instinct took over. Muscle memory bypassed her blinded brain. She slammed the stick hard left and pushed the throttles forward. The Super Hornet banked violently, pulling 4 Gs. The blood drained from her head, pooling in her legs as the G-suit squeezed her thighs with a pneumatic grip. She needed to break the line of sight. She needed to get the jet out of the beam. For 2 agonizing seconds, the light persisted, pinning them to the sky like a butterfly on a mounting board. And then it stopped. The physical light vanished, leaving behind an aggressive, throbbing afterimage of violently dancing purple and black spots in Sarah's vision. She blinked furiously, tears streaming down her face, stinging the raw skin under her mask. "Dave!" she gasped, fighting the sudden, sickening wave of vertigo that accompanied flying blind. "Dave, you good?" Yeah. Son of a bitch. I can't see a thing. Just spots. Keep your eyes closed, Sarah ordered, trying to pry her own open. Give it a second. It was a dazzler. High yield. Her vision began to return in patchy, blurred fragments. She could make out the faint glow of the instrument panel, the green lines of the heads-up display superimposed against the dark sky. Okay, she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Okay, we're flying. We're alive. She leveled the jet out, swallowing back the bile in her throat. She needed to check her instruments. She needed to lock on to whoever just took a shot at them. She looked down at the center display, wiping a gloved hand across her watery eyes to clear her vision. She waited for the radar sweep. She waited for the comforting green blips. But the screen was changing. The digital map of the coastline warped. The radar sweep slowed, stuttered, and then froze entirely. "Dave," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. "Check your scopes." "I'm trying. My eyes are watering like a waterfall. Hang on." A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Sarah, my screens are freezing." Before she could respond, a low mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the engines. It was a sound she had never heard in the air before. The sound of power dying. 2 seconds after the laser vanished, the center console went black. Then the left display, then the right. The heads-up display. The glowing green numbers that told her where the sky ended and the ground began, flickered violently, emitted a sharp pop, and vanished into the glass. The radar screen, their eyes and ears in the dark, was completely blank. Silence in a fighter jet is not actually silent. It's the absence of the right noises. The roar of the twin F414 turbofan engines was still there, vibrating through the seat of Sarah's pants. The rush of air over the canopy was still a constant, tearing hiss. But the internal noises, the electronic hum of the avionics, the rhythmic ticking of the radar processor, the comforting static of the radio, were dead. "Dave!" Sarah called out. No intercom. She reached up and slammed her hand against the side of her helmet, hoping to jar a loose connection. Nothing. The digital comms system was bricked. Panic, cold and sharp, finally sank its claws into her chest. Flying at night over the ocean with no instruments is a death sentence. The human inner ear is a flawed, primitive organ. Without visual reference points, your brain will lie to you. It will tell you that you are flying straight and level while you are actually banking into a terminal dive. It's called spatial disorientation, and it has killed better pilots than her. She had to focus. She reached between her knees, finding the small, circular, analog backup instruments, the standby attitude indicator, the mechanical altimeter, the airspeed indicator. They were tiny. They were hard to read, but they operated on pitot-static pressure and internal gyroscopes. They didn't need the jet's main computer. Wings level, she told herself, staring at the tiny mechanical plane on the dial. Keep the wings level, she yelled over her shoulder, unfastening her oxygen mask and twisting her head back as far as her harness would allow. "Dave, can you hear me?" She heard a muffled shout in return. Miller was doing the same. He leaned forward, screaming over the ambient roar of the airframe. "Everything is gone. I have no screens, no targeting. We are blind." "I know," she yelled back. "Standby flight instruments are active. We are still flying. What happened? Lasers don't fry avionics." He was right. A dazzler is basically a massive flashlight. It blinds optics and eyeballs. It doesn't cause a total electrical cascade failure, unless it wasn't just a laser, unless the laser was just the targeting mechanism for something else. A high-powered microwave pulse, a localized EMP. Someone had just painted them with light to get a pinpoint fix, and then hit them with an electronic sledgehammer. Sarah turned back around, her hands gripping the stick and throttle with white-knuckled intensity. The Super Hornet was a fly-by-wire aircraft. The computers flew the plane. The pilot just offered suggestions. If the flight control computers were fried, they should be tumbling out of the sky as a 20-ton aerodynamic brick. She moved the stick a fraction of an inch to the right. The jet sluggishly banked right. She moved it back. It leveled out. Mechanical backup mode, she realized. The digital flight control system was offline, but the jet had reverted to its direct electrical linkage backup. It flew like a dump truck driving through molasses. But it flew. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" she shouted into her mask, instinctively keying the radio even though she knew it was dead. "Overlord, this is Ghost 2-1. We have suffered catastrophic avionics failure, declaring an emergency." She waited, nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing in the mask. They were completely cut off. 300 miles from the carrier, flying a crippled jet in pitch darkness over hostile waters, with an enemy below them who possessed technology that intelligence had claimed didn't exist yet. "Sarah," Miller yelled from the back. "Look down." She leaned her helmet against the cold glass of the canopy, squinting through the lingering purple spots in her vision. The clouds below them had broken. The ocean was visible again, and it wasn't empty. Directly below their flight path, a massive silhouette cut through the water. It was entirely blacked out. No running lights, no deck illumination. But the starlight catching the white water of its wake revealed its sheer scale. It wasn't a fishing trawler, it was a warship, a big one. The hull geometry was sharp, angular, designed to deflect radar waves. "You see that?" Miller shouted. "I see it. They're running dark, and they just blinded us." Sarah's mind raced. A stealth warship operating in the strait. A localized EMP weapon. If this ship made it through the choke point, it could position itself right off the coast of an allied nation, completely undetected by the aging radar nets. They had just stumbled onto a ghost ship, a first strike asset, making its maiden run in the dark. And the ghost ship knew they were up here. Suddenly, a harsh, mechanical buzzing filled the cockpit. Sarah jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was the radar warning receiver. The tiny analog display on the corner of the dash was flickering to life. It was a separate, isolated, rudimentary system. A single red strobe appeared on the tiny circular screen. Beep. 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 "Dave!" Sarah yelled. "RWR is alive. I'm getting a spike from the surface." "They're painting us!" Miller yelled back, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "They're locking on." The warship hadn't just swatted their electronics to hide. It had swatted their electronics so they couldn't shoot back. They were a $60 million sitting duck. Beep, 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 beep. The tone accelerated. The mechanical noise drilled into Sarah's skull, triggering every primal fear reflex a pilot had. They were locked. A surface-to-air missile was likely already burning through the sky toward them, invisible in the dark. She had no flares. She had no chaff. She had no electronic countermeasures. The digital dispensers were dead. She had a jet that flew like a wounded whale, and the vast, uncaring dark of the ocean below. "Brace yourself, Dave," Sarah whispered, grabbing the throttle with both hands. "We're going for a ride." She slammed the throttles to the stops, hitting the afterburners, and shoved the nose of the heavy jet straight down toward the black water. The descent was pure, unadulterated violence. Without the digital flight control computers to smooth out the aerodynamics, the Super Hornet didn't glide. It plummeted. Gravity and 50,000 pounds of thrust seized the aircraft, ripping it through the thin air of the upper atmosphere. Beep! The solid, unbroken tone of the radar warning receiver meant the missile was in the air. It was tracking. It was hunting. Sarah fought the stick. The hydraulic actuators groaned, protesting the raw physical force she was applying. Usually, the jet's brain wouldn't let a pilot pull maneuvers that would snap the airframe. Right now, the jet had no brain. It only had Sarah. If she pulled too hard, the wings would shear off. If she didn't pull hard enough, a warhead would vaporize them. "Chaff! Flare! Anything!" she screamed. "Dead! The dispensers are dead!" Miller shouted back. His voice was ragged, stretched thin by the building, G-forces pressing his chest into his spine. The tiny analog altimeter on the center console was a blur. The needle spun, counterclockwise, so fast it looked like a solid white disk. 30,000 feet. 25. 20. The night outside was a black void. There was no horizon to reference, no ground lights to orient against. The human brain hates the dark. It fills it with lies. Sarah felt an overwhelming, nauseating sensation that she was flying upside down. Her inner ear screamed at her to pull back, to climb. "Trust the instruments," a drilled voice in her head repeated. "Trust the dials." She stared at the mechanical attitude indicator. A tiny, glowing line showing the plane pointed straight down. 15,000 feet. 10. The air grew thicker. The airframe began to shudder violently. A high-pitched squeal echoed through the canopy as the wind sheared across the metal at near Mach 1. The controls stiffened, fighting her inputs. "Beep!" "It's getting closer," Miller yelled. "I'm going for the deck." Sarah grunted, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She needed to break the radar lock. Radar waves struggle against the chaotic, shifting surface of the ocean. The waves create clutter. If she could get the jet low enough, skimming the water, the ship's radar might lose them in the static of the sea state. 5,000 feet. "Pull up!" Miller screamed. It wasn't advice. It was primal panic. "Sarah, pull up!" 3,000. She hauled back on the stick. It didn't move. The aerodynamic pressure pushing against the control surfaces was too massive. The jet was locked in the dive. Adrenaline, cold and metallic, flooded her veins. She braced her boots against the rudder pedals, grabbed the stick with both hands, and pulled with everything she had in her shoulders and back. She screamed, a guttural, ugly sound born of sheer exertion. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose began to rise. The G-forces hit them like a falling safe. 5 Gs, 7 Gs. The blood ripped out of Sarah's brain. Her peripheral vision turned grey, then black. The tiny analog dials vanished into a pinpoint of light. She was fighting to stay conscious, tightening her core, executing the hooked breathing maneuver to force oxygenated blood back into her skull. "Hucker, breathe. Hucker, breathe." The jet leveled out with a brutal, spine-compressing jolt. Outside, the blackness was suddenly broken by a furious, churning white mist. They were flying at 600 miles an hour, barely 100 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The jet exhaust kicked up a blinding spray of salt water. The solid tone of the RWR stuttered. Beep, beep, beep. Silence. 2 seconds later, the sky above them tore open. The surface-to-air missile, having lost its target in the ocean clutter, detonated 1,000 feet overhead. The shockwave hit the ocean, then bounced up, slamming into the Super Hornet. The jet bucked violently. Sarah fought the stick, fighting to keep the wings level, terrified that dipping a wingtip by even a fraction of a degree would send them cartwheeling into the ocean at the speed of a bullet. They stabilized. The airframe settled into a rough, vibrating cruise. They were alive. Sarah slumped against the harness, her chest heaving. Her flight suit clung to her spine, a cold, wet, second skin. The smell of ozone in the cockpit had been replaced by the sharp, acidic tang of her own sweat. "Dave," she gasped. A long beat of silence. Then a shaky breath. "Yeah, I'm here. My spine is 2 inches shorter, but I'm here." "The lock?" "Broken. We're under their radar floor." Sarah looked at the fuel gauge. The tiny needle was hovering precariously near the red zone. The afterburner dive had eaten through their reserves. They had maybe 10 minutes of flight time left before the engines flamed out. "We need to climb," Miller said. "We need altitude to glide, and we need altitude to see if the UHF backup radio can punch through whatever jamming field that ship is throwing out. If we climb, they paint us again. They shoot us again. If we stay down here, we hit the water in 10 minutes anyway." He was right. The math was brutally simple. They were trapped in a box. The floor was the ocean. The ceiling was the ship's radar umbrella. And the walls were closing in as the fuel burned away. Sarah adjusted her grip on the throttle. Her hands were shaking. She hated that her hands were shaking. She took a deep breath, forcing the tremor out of her muscles. "They blinded us," she said, her voice dropping the panic, replaced by a cold, settling anger. "They bricked my jet." "Sarah, they're a first-strike stealth asset, Dave. If they make it through the strait tonight, they disappear. Tomorrow, they're sitting 20 miles off the coast of an allied city with a localized EMP and God knows what else. We can't stop them, Sarah. We are flying a dead piece of metal." Not completely dead. She reached down to the armament panel. The digital targeting displays were completely black. The smart weapons, the GPS-guided bombs, the radar-guided missiles were useless blocks of concrete hanging off the wings. They needed the computers to talk to them. But the F/A-18 was still a fighter plane. And fighter planes have guns. Mounted in the nose of the aircraft was an M61A2 Vulcan, a 20mm, 6-barrel rotary cannon. It was mechanical. It fed off raw electrical power and a physical trigger pull. It didn't need a computer. It just needed a pilot to point it. "Tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking," Miller said. "Arm the gun, Dave. Sarah, we don't have a pipper. We don't have a heads-up display. You'd be aiming by mark 1 eyeball in the dark against a warship equipped with automated point defense cannons. If we hit their radar masts, we blind them, just like they blinded us. We level the playing field. Then we climb. We squawk Mayday on the backup UHF, and Overlord sends the cavalry." It was a suicide mission. They both knew it. But the alternative was ditching in the dark and waiting to drown. "Arming the gun," Miller sighed. The heavy metallic clunk of the cannon's feed mechanism, cycling, echoed through the floorboards. "You're a crazy bitch, Jenkins. You know that?" "I've been told. Hold on to something." Sarah banked the heavy jet. She didn't look at the compass. She flew by memory, turning the aircraft back toward the general grid coordinates where the ghost ship had been holding. Skimming the waves at 100 feet, the world was a sensory deprivation tank. She kept her eyes glued to the analog altimeter and the attitude indicator, glancing up only briefly to scan the dark horizon. "Look for the wake," she told herself, whispering into the dead mask. Look for the wake. A warship displacing thousands of tons of water leaves a scar on the ocean. Even running completely dark, the bioluminescence of the churned water and the starlight reflecting off the foam would be visible if they got close enough. 5 minutes of fuel. Every second that ticked by felt like an hour. The physical exhaustion of flying the heavy, uncooperative airframe was setting in. Her arms burned. Then she saw it. 2 miles ahead, slightly to the right, a long, faint V shape etched into the black water. The ghost ship. It was moving fast, trying to clear the sector before any backup arrived. "I have visual on the wake," Sarah called out. "Target is ahead, popping up to 500 feet. Stand by." She pulled back gently on the stick. The altimeter climbed. 200, 300, 500. The silhouette of the ship materialized against the dark water. It was massive, sleek, angular, painted in radar-absorbent black. The superstructure was a geometric pyramid, bristling with communication arrays and the flat, octagonal panels of a phased array radar system. The RWR on her dash immediately began to screech. "Beep, beep, beep. They see us!" Miller yelled. "Let them look." Sarah shoved the throttles forward. The engines roared, eating the last of their fuel. She didn't try to evade. She didn't jink. She flew a terrifyingly predictable, straight line directly at the broadside of the ship. Down on the deck of the warship, automated CIWS, close-in weapon system, turrets swiveled with robotic precision. Streams of red tracer fire erupted from the darkness, a deadly garden hose of anti-aircraft rounds arcing toward the jet. Tracers work both ways, Sarah thought. She used the enemy's own fire to line up her shot. She dipped the nose of the Super Hornet, ignoring the glowing lines of death passing inches from her canopy. She focused on the geometric pyramid of the ship's superstructure. At 1 mile out, she squeezed the trigger on the stick. The Vulcan cannon roared. It wasn't a series of gunshots. It was a singular, vibrating groan, a 60-second chainsaw that shook the entire jet. A steady stream of 2-inch-thick depleted uranium rounds poured from the nose of the Super Hornet. Without a targeting computer, the first few rounds splashed into the ocean, kicking up geysers of white water. Sarah walked the rudder pedals, physically dragging the nose of the jet to the right, walking the stream of bullets up the side of the hull. Sparks showered violently as the 20mm rounds chewed through the radar-absorbent coating. The stream reached the superstructure. The heavy shells hammered into the phased array radar panels, shattering them like glass. They tore through the communication masts, sparking secondary electrical explosions that lit up the night sky in flashes of harsh white and orange. The CIWS fire abruptly stopped as the ship's targeting sensors were shredded by the Vulcan's barrage. "Pull up!" Miller screamed. The black mass of the ship filled the canopy. Sarah hauled back on the stick, hitting the afterburners. The jet roared, missing the highest antenna mast by less than 50 feet. The heat of the explosions washed over the underside of the fuselage. They punched through the marine layer of clouds, bursting out into the clear, star-filled upper atmosphere. The sudden visibility was staggering. Millions of stars stretched out above them, uncaring and brilliant. The engines coughed. The right engine spooled down, vibrating harshly. "Right engine flame out!" Miller yelled. "Fuel is bingo. We are running on fumes." "Switch on the UHF backup," Sarah commanded, trimming the aircraft to fly on one engine. She reached down and twisted the dial on the small analog radio panel by her left knee. She keyed the microphone. "Overlord, this is Ghost 2-1. Blind transmit. We are critical. Avionics dead. Target coordinates follow. Hostile stealth surface vessel, radar disabled. We are punching out. Over." Static hissed through her earpiece. It sounded like the ocean. It sounded like defeat. She looked at the altimeter. 15,000 feet and dropping. The left engine gave a violent shudder. The fuel lines were sucking air. "Dave," Sarah said softly. "Ejection sequence. On my mark." "It's been a pleasure, Captain," Miller replied. His voice was finally calm. She reached down, her fingers curling around the yellow and black ejection handle between her legs. Then, the static in her ear broke. "Ghost 2-1. This is Overlord. We hear you loud and clear. Radar signature of hostile vessel confirmed via your visual fix. Carrier strike group is vectoring. Search and rescue choppers are already in the air." "Good work, Ghost. See you on the deck." Sarah let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. She looked out at the starlight reflecting off the ocean far below. They were going to lose the jet. They were going to spend the next hour floating in cold, black water. But they weren't going to die in the dark. "All right, Dave," Sarah said, pulling her chin down to her chest and tightening her grip on the handle. "Let's go swimming. If you felt the G-forces in your chest and the cold sweat of that pitch-black descent, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to keep the engines running. Share this with someone who loves high-stakes aviation, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive, boots-on-the-ground stories from the front lines. Drop a comment below. Would you have trusted your gut and pulled the trigger in the dark? See you in the next one.